Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon. Hi, good afternoon. Yes, I am not Ambassador Catherine Mugai Mwangi. I'm Angela Muvumba Sellström, and it's me again. Unfortunately, the High Commissioner has had to remain with the delegation regarding the talks, so she's not able to join us at the last minute. But I think we're still in for a very interesting, very important session on strengthening multilateralism, focusing on Germany, Sweden, and the Security Council. And we have two very, very eminent, I'm very excited, as you know already from my earlier presentation, for our speakers today. So to my left is Ambassador Andreas Peschke, who is Germany's ambassador to South Africa, and he previously served as his country's ambassador to Nigeria and Russia. And to my right is Ambassador Annika Söder, who is the president of the Board of Governors of the European Institute of Peace in Brussels, and a member of the Swedish Women's Mediation Network. And she previously served as Sweden's Deputy Foreign Minister. So we are going to, I think, just go ahead and begin. And I can't remember who would go first. Andreas would go first. So if you please take the floor, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Angela, Annika. Remember our pleasant experiences on the Brussels arena, now here in South Africa, talking about the United Nations. Thank you also very much to Professor Adebayo for bringing us all together today on this very exciting conference. Then I think relating to the last panel, I should greet you in proper Ubuntu philosophy, Sani Bonani, which means I see you and I hope that you see me too. I think the topic of our panel is strengthening multilateralism, Germany and Sweden and the UN Security Council in Africa. Also listening to the previous panels and the last one, if you look at the work of the Security Council as it is now and has been for a couple of months now, even years, actually we have to admit something is wrong. I mean, in less than a year, I think we resorted 4 times in emergency sessions to the General Assembly of the United Nations under Uniting for Peace in order to deal with issues which would be properly under the realm and within the remit and responsibility of the Security Council. So that is actually quite often, and that should give us ample opportunity to think what we need to do to remedy this state of affairs. Other than that, talking about what the Security Council is doing, I think a very large percentage, and previous speakers have alluded to it, of the work of the Security Council is actually dedicated to problems on the African continent, to conflicts on the African continent. I think this is also reflected in the work of members of the Security Council. And I would like to give you some practical remarks about our last non-permanent membership in the Security Council, 2019-2020, which we actually shared with South Africa, because we are sitting in the Security Council for the second time at the same time. And I think we had a very close collaboration also between our countries as part of the E10 in the Security Council. I think it was a very difficult time because of the pandemic. The Security Council could not meet. Meetings went virtual, and I think this is very difficult for the negotiations within the Security Council. There are very sensitive issues to be talked about in the Security Council. If you cannot meet in person and negotiate, it makes business very difficult. And then, what we see now, and it was talked about in the last panel, the polarization of the Security Council was already seen during that 2 years South Africa and Germany were on the Security Council. Still, I think our aim was to be ambitious and to make the Security Council actually act preventively, preventive work in order to prevent conflicts so that we don't have to do actual conflict work solving conflicts. So we did a lot of work, and I recall that also because sometimes being an ambassador now to South Africa, and when I talk to people, I often hear the argument, oh yeah, now the war in Ukraine, Russia's war against Ukraine, now you are there. You are taking care of it, but when there are conflicts elsewhere in the world, you didn't listen, you didn't do anything. I think this is probably not really true. I think when we were in the Security Council, one of our regional priorities was Libya. You know, we try to give a new impetus to conflict resolution. We try to start the so-called Berlin process, bringing together all the warring factions from Libya, and actually convince them to work in a new format with partners towards a political solution in Libya. And I think we laid the ground for another high-level conference in June 2021. So that was one of the important things where we kind of tried as a non-permanent member, as an interested party, give a real impetus to take forward conflict resolution as it is in North Africa. I think we also intensively worked on Sudan. Also in close conjunction with our South African friends and partners. I think it was a time, at that time, that the previous UN mission, UNAMID, came to an end. So there was a big question, what follows after? I think we really tried to push hard, together with others, to come up with a follow-up mission. Actually, Zahir spoke about co-lead responsibility and pen holdership and stuff. In that instance, we worked together with the UK in a joint pen holdership and co-sponsorship. And we actually managed at that time as the Security Council to launch a new mission, UNITAMS, which actually was a good renovation of the old mission, because it covered the entire Sudan, not only parts of it. So it was a step forward. We all know that things both in Libya and Sudan continue to be difficult. But I think these were two instances where we joined hands to take issues forward. We also, of course, worked on the cross-border resolution on Syria. It sounds today as it is, you know, also a long time back, but we pushed it forward. So I think the main conflicts, the main issues we dealt with during our membership, non-permanent membership, were actually conflicts outside the European continent. Two of them, as I've said, on the African continent. I think in the previous panel we also spoke about not only the regional work of the Security Council, but also about this, the sectoral work of the Security Council. And I would like to mention two issues. One is the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which is very important to many countries. I think it is very important to South Africa. It is important to many other representatives of countries in this forum. It is also important to Sweden. It's also important to Germany. Here I think we worked hand in hand with South Africa to give new impetus. I think under German chairmanship we adopted in April 2019 resolution 2467, paying particular attention to combating conflict-related sexual violence, a very important part of the many facets of resolution of the WPS agenda. And actually we worked together. South Africa not only supported this resolution, but I think it also continued with an initiative on a follow-up resolution. So I think that was a very good example of working together. Another one is, I think, a sectoral issue is the climate and security agenda, which is very relevant to the African continent. I think climate-related problems are a security risk everywhere in the world, but also in Africa. If you think about conflicts on using land, on land distribution, on conflicts on land issues for instance, in Nigeria, if I may say so. But also in other countries where land is a really scarce commodity and the population figures are rising. So I think the climate and security agenda is very important. So we took quite a number of initiatives on that agenda as well, which is important to move forward as a Security Council, and there we also collaborated with South Africa. So I think as a E10 we are always in a specific position. It was discussed in the previous panel. Sometimes we try to open up the work in the Security Council a little bit. We try to give a voice to civil society as well. I had a civil society forum alongside with the Security Council. I think we had to listen to a couple of cynical comments by some of the P5. I'm not revealing who, but by some. I think we also try to take forward the non-proliferation and disarmament agenda. And I think when we talk about collaboration between the Security Council and regional organizations, continental organizations like the EU, I think this is an issue. I mean, there is this initiative within the EU, silencing the guns, a very important one. I think it is, if it's going to be made effective, it should be married to activities also in the Security Council. So I think this was yet another important area. I think also on the collaboration with other UN agencies, we for the first time invited the High Commissioner for Human Rights to the Security Council, so that also added value to our work on human rights and conflict resolution. So, so that's what we did. Now, where we are now, I think we are seeking re-election as a non-permanent member to the Security Council. I'm saying this not to make any publicity for our case. We are going to do a couple of démarches here on that one. No, we see consultations, I would say. So for 27, 28, as you know, I always ask my colleagues, why are we doing that? I remember our, not the last but one, 2011, 2012, non-permanent membership, also with South Africa. At the time I was spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry in Berlin, and there was this Libya resolution, a no-fly zone over Libya in the Security Council. And Germany, other than all our allies, abstained. And other than South Africa, which supported the resolution at the time. So, and you know, both the Chancellor and our Foreign Minister were convinced this is the right decision, but I think we got a shitstorm in Germany. And that contributed to losing even more of my hair, so that... So I asked my people, you know, remember this? Do we want this another time, another time, another time? But no, and, jokes aside, I think we are aware that all of us have an international responsibility, and we should try to, you know, do what we can in order to make a contribution with international fora, to make a contribution to peace and security, and we feel that is the right thing to run again. But you know, that doesn't take away the important question, and we discussed it in the previous panel, about the need of reform of the Security Council. I mean, as the Security Council, as it is constituted today, it reflects the reality of 1945. Whether it is in a position to really react effectively to today's challenges, I think is really a question we need to discuss intensively. I mean, before Russia started its war of aggression, I think we had the issue of non-representation of important parts of the world on the Security Council. No permanent members from Africa. I think this is just something which is totally not in conjunction with today's realities. So we need to work on it. Zahir has alluded to it, that between the Esovini Compromise and the position of the G4, of which Germany is a part, there are a couple of nuances. But I think there's also a large area of agreement that we need to strengthen. The representativeness of the Security Council of today's reality. So that is really a must to continue to push for a reform. But I think what we need to reflect upon is also the capacity of the Security Council to act. And there was this question in the previous panel about the right to veto. I think there have been a couple of initiatives at the United Nations discussion at the General Assembly about the right to veto. I think, when we think about enlarging the Security Council, taking in new members, I think this is a question that needs to be discussed as well, because the Security Council, even in its today's composition, on important issues is not able to act. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these many Uniting for Peace resolutions. If we make it larger still, more diverse, that could even, be another obstacle for the capacity to act. So I think we need to reflect on this and find the right solution. But I think to push for reforms is quite important. So now I think, and this was discussed in the previous panel, that we are now living in a watershed moment in international affairs. And looking at it from the perspective of the Security Council, I think we are not just facing the aggression of a country by another country, but we are facing the aggression of a country by a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, which has a specific, special responsibility for peace. So it's not just a flagrant violation of international norms and resolutions and international order, but it's just by anybody. It's a flagrant violation of international norms by a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations. It's not just a day. I think it's now today, to the day, 8 months. Every day, we have the 24th of October, the war was started until 24th of February. Every day, international law is being violated. And of course, this has led to a situation in the Security Council that I think undermined its capacity to act, quite frankly, on this question, but unfortunately also on other questions. So I think we need to also to reflect upon, until we have reformed the system, what can we do to live up to our responsibility and as an international community? And I would say that overall, the international community and the United Nations, in a way, withstood the attack on international norms by one of the members of the Security Council. I think we found ways to give a clear voice to a big majority of member states at the United Nations. When the issues were put to a vote before the General Assembly. I think that is one thing, and other UN organizations continue to function. I mean, this is quite important. We not only have the Security Council of the United Nations, everybody's focusing his attention or her attention on the UNSC, but I think we also have UNEP, UNDP, which is quite important for development. We have UN Habitat, quite an important meeting of UN Habitat in South Africa a couple of days ago, with the executive director of UN Habitat coming to South Africa. We have WTO, the World Health Organization, and others, and they continue to work. Even I think when we try to take a position on the violation of international norms, also in these organizations, but they continue to work and they continue to be productive, which is quite important. And one element of this is, of course, the Human Rights Council, and I'm quite happy that Germany and South Africa are going to sit jointly on the Human Rights Council between 2023 and 25. And actually we are looking forward to quite another round of intensive collaboration between our UN teams and our countries. So I think that's where we are. I think, but it's quite important. The point I want to make is, for the time being, where the Security Council is paralyzed in important questions, we have to strengthen other parts of the United Nations, and in order to make the United Nations system relevant and functioning in today's world, and not forgetting and also coping with other problems. I mean, while we are speaking, we have a war in Ethiopia, right. And I think it's quite a relief to hear that there is a negotiating process. I think South Africa actually is taking responsibility in hosting it. So this is quite important. We must not forget that these important realities and also take our responsibility on these issues and conflicts as well. So maybe I stop here and leave some of the issues for the discussion. But thank you for listening, and thank you for this discussion in general. I think it comes at a very important point in time. I think it's sometimes people say, you know, climate change. Some people behave as if we had a second Earth in our pocket. With the United Nations, it's a bit the same. You know, we have just one United Nations, and we need to take care to hand it over in a proper in a proper way and functioning to our successors. I think it's quite important. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you. Yabonga.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Peschke. I will actually try not to say any more, hold my comments and summary. I would really like to hand over directly to Ambassador Söder. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Angela, and thank you, Andreas. Great to meet you here. I believe that all of us benefited from the end of the Cold War. This is way back now, but as we are approaching maybe another even hot war, I wanted to recall what happened in 1989. Sweden was willing to be in the peacekeeping mission in Namibia, who was about to become independent, but we were not allowed in by South Africa. And this, of course, shows what a long way we have come. And I mention this because we, as I said, we all benefited. And as we seem to be in a paradigm shift that may take us not into a Cold War, but even worse, a situation between great powers, between regional powers that take various effects and are very dangerous. It's really important to know where we are, what we want to be, and how we can act together to come back to or preserve what we have of of cooperation across continents, led by those of us that actually believe in cooperation and believe in the say also of those that are less powerful economically or militarily or elsewhere. So why should a small or medium-sized country join the UN Security Council? I think I've been educated that this is actually a duty. And I think this is true for all the Nordic countries. And I say this because we're here with the Nordic Africa Institute, and also the Security Council candidacies of the Nordic countries are actually rotated, and we support each other's. And I believe that we do this from a certain viewpoint, in a listening mode where we actually want to contribute and play the role stated in the Charter that non-permanent members actually represent all members of the United Nations, not necessarily their own regional belonging or their own national interests. So this may sound naive in days like this, but I think this is a very important principle to stick to. In this context, I also wanted to say that when we were elected, one African ambassador in New York said that we're so happy now to have a fourth African member of the Security Council, and I hope that we lived up to that during our 2 years tenure. And along these lines, of course, we started early on, already before South Africa was elected a member, the cooperation with South Africa on the elected 10 cooperation. And I wanted to say a couple of additional words on the elected 10, because I believe it's still very, very important. In a way, you can say that there is a hidden veto, since every vote needs to be, you need to have at least 9 votes to have something go through. It's about the continuity, which would add to non-permanent members' capacity if you actually work well together over and transfer the knowledge, and that would strengthen the role of the non-permanent member. So I was so happy when we left the Security Council that South Africa, Germany, and also Indonesia actually started to deepen the work that we had started on strengthening the elected 10. Something that is very important to remember is that the strength of the P5, even if they are divided, that strength has grown over the last, I would say, 10, 15 years. All the important Under-Secretaries General are from the permanent members of the Security Council. As we've heard, they have not only the veto, but also they are very often pen holders. And there is another feature that I believe makes the E10 important, and that is that very little do the pen holders use the knowledge that sits in the Secretariat of the United Nations. So the political department's knowledge is not really used. And if that is used, it will strengthen also the pen holder, no matter if the pen holder is a non-permanent member or a permanent member. I could also mention that we, apropos said this morning, we insisted as E10 to come back to the routine, to have briefings in the Security Council on issues that are not on the security agenda. This is an early warning mechanism that has not been very much in use, and I think this is also dependent on how individual or permanent 5 actors or the permanent 5 as a group, how they see the situation. So I would say that the fact that the E10 as a group sees that it represents all the membership gives a strength to the Security Council, widens the discussions, and to summarize, can contribute to reducing the polarization in the Council. It happened a few times during our tenure. At the present juncture, it may be very difficult, but there's no reason to give up on the non-permanent members' joint role, even if it's very, very, very difficult in the present times. And that principled approach taken by the ETAN can also put some pressure on the permanent members that would more often look at their national interests. And I would say that this perspective is important for Ukraine, of course, but even equally important for protracted conflicts, Ethiopia, not that protracted, Syria, Myanmar, and not to forget the very, very devastating conflicts that the Security Council should be dealing with. UN Security Council reform has been mentioned by many. We've advocated this for long. The dichotomy between legitimacy and efficiency is very often used in the debate. I believe that the efficiency and maybe efficacy of the Security Council comes from its legitimacy. So if it's not legitimate, it will not be efficient. And that is why an enlargement is relevant, and that is why we need to have better representation from various continents. And question raised by many, as early as 2004, actually, by the then Swedish Prime Minister, was to have the EU, the AU and others nominate permanent or become the additional permanent members. But then we have the problem with the OAS, which is not consistent and relevant as is the EU or the AU, or the EU not even, because the EU is not the regional organization formally. It's actually the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, where we have members like Russia, so it's complicated. Same in Asia with ASEAN. So looking at the regions, it becomes difficult and very asymmetric. Angela earlier spoke about our work, the Swedish work in the Council on women, peace and security, and here I wanted to explain how we tried to campaign for a seat, being very truthful to our ideas, and we based our Security Council tenure and campaign on international law, humanitarian issues and humanitarian law, gender and human rights. We also engaged beyond the Security Council to push issues that were on the agenda, like the conflict in Yemen. We tried to help the United States and North Korea negotiate some sort of solution to the nuclear option of North Korea, and we engaged also in the Syrian conflict, in addition to the work that we had already earlier on started in some of the African conflicts. We also actually modeled on the AU-UN engagement. We started to promote EU-UN engagement, despite the fact that we have two permanent members that have an exception in the EU treaty to actually work together with the rest of the European Union. It's still there in the treaty, but I think we're now with France, since UK is not a member anymore, we are closer to an EU cooperation, and there is much more understanding of the dynamics of the UN and all its members now than some years ago. Then when it comes to women, peace and security, I think, Angela, you were too kind this morning. I believe that what is the missing link in the work we did on women, peace and security in the Council, despite the fact that we managed to get language into almost all concrete conflict-related resolutions, is actually the implementation. And to make the decisions a tool for civil society organizations and others that want to promote full-fledged peace to refer to the Security Council resolutions. And this is, of course, up to various UN members' representations abroad, but it's also up to the UN Secretariat, UN Women, the resident coordinators and others to actually inform the reports that the Secretariat gives to the Security Council following up the different resolutions. Basically, we also worked to get concrete language, as I said, into the different resolutions. We did the same with the climate and security issue, and actually the first Security Council resolution referring to climate and security is actually a resolution on Lake Chad. And that was a milestone for us, in addition to the work that many of us are doing when it comes to the thematic work. We also promoted children, or to avoid to have children in armed conflict, and that work has also been continued, even if we have many, many difficult issues before us in this regard. I know that the civil society, women's organizations complained about not having as many open meetings as they would have wanted. We thought that closed meetings were better for negotiations, and that dilemma that the Security Council faces between being open and allowing everyone to speak on the one hand, and to actually have the 15 members focus on issues also needs to be addressed, and true negotiations cannot happen in the open. So Professor Yu wanted us to discuss some of the elephants in the room, and actually I had already prepared for that. I believe there is a risk of a north-south divide now that we need to find ways to overcome. I believe that the post-colonial sensitivities are still there, and we need to find a way to address them, being sensitive to both sides' views. There is also the double standard issue that I find to be very, very important. Iraq was of course a breach of international law and the UN Charter. It should be remembered that many European countries actually opposed that, like Germany, France, Sweden, and some other Nordic countries. And I'm saying this because it's not black and white, and there are so many bridges to continue to build on. Iraq cannot be redone. Palestine may actually be an issue that can actually be addressed, because when I try to explain the existential issue for Europe, Eastern Europe and Northern Europe, when it comes to Ukraine, I very often refer to Palestine and how sensitive and difficult that issue is for the Palestinians and for many people that are against occupation and want to find ways to abide with Security Council resolutions and international law. So I see opportunity here, and we need to identify the silver linings on this crisis and overcome some of the problems. Another one is, of course, what is considered to be Western conditionality and top-down approaches, where our strong belief in democracy and human rights is very often considered to be interference or top-down approaches and conditionality. I'll come back to that. So where is the solution? Earlier today, the common agenda launched by the Secretary General was mentioned, and it so happens that the former Swedish Prime Minister, Stefan Löfven, together with the former President of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, they are co-chairing this endeavor. I know they really want to reach out. Where are the people? They very often ask, and they have been tasked to deal with the foundations that will help achieve the sustainable development goals. It's about structural issues. And I find this fascinating, very, very difficult in the present juncture, because it's about the financial system in the world, not only the World Bank, IMF, and the development banks, but also other aspects of the financial system. It's about technology, internet, and all of that. It's about the role of the regional organizations, maybe less difficult. It's about prevention and peace building. And here I wanted to mention the Peace Building Commission. I made a review some years ago about the peace building architecture. I think the Peace Building Commission is underused. Many countries don't want to be on the agenda of the Security Council. But the Peace Building Commission is actually a peer thing where you can go and get good advice from 40 members of the United Nations. Some of them have been in conflict, some are donors, some are actors in other ways. And I see that as also a way to strengthen the UN, even if we do not manage to sort out UN Security Council issues for the time being. Another issue on this common agenda, high-level advisory board, is nuclear disarmament, also a very pertinent issue these days, where I believe that the Permanent Five should get their act together and restate what they said as late as in January about not using nuclear arms. We will see, but this is the task of this high-level advisory board, and that board, as well as the PBC on a daily basis, should be given much more room when it comes to working on the very difficult issues that we're trying to address. And this is, of course, also the PBC, in addition to the many other instruments we have, all the specialized agencies, the funds and programs, all the norms that the UN actually set up and that we're all living in accordance with on a daily basis without really thinking of it. Even if many of them are not related to peace and security, they are there for our safety. So let me finally come back to perceptions related to the present situation. I guess in a way that the Ukraine decisions had to be moved from the Security Council to the General Assembly, challenged many of the ordinary members of the UN because we were all forced to take a position on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That may be difficult in itself. If we look back at the situation of the Cold War, many countries on this continent and other continents as well were really under pressure when it comes to the proxy situations that they were facing because of the great power struggle. The EU perception, or the Western perception, or whatever term we use, is that countries that do not come to vote at all or abstain, that they are under Russian pressure. And there is less understanding of what I said first, that it could be useful to stay out of a potential great power conflict. The EU view on the Ukraine conflict is that it's existential, it's on our border, that might can never go before right, as somebody said earlier today, that the breaches of the UN Charter are also breaches of the European Security Order as laid down in the Organization of Security and Cooperation of Europe, involving also, by the way, Canada and the United States, and that the rules that are not abided with are so important that countries should vote in favor of our position. So I fear, or I hope, that we can have more of a conversation of what does this mean for the safety and security of each individual country? What does this mean for having this multilateral approach that all of us want to see? And how can we rebuild the trust that we may have lost in all of the conversations that we've had since the earlier votes this spring? I've mentioned some of the double standards issues. I also believe that the silver lining is that many more are now aware of the importance of working together towards more unity, towards using Chapter 6 and more peaceful resolution of conflict, investing more in this. And I know that this is also what is being discussed in Brussels, in the foreign ministry part of the European Union, among ministers, and a growing care for the relations, not least with Africa. Of course, you can say that this is because they don't want to have China and Russia dominate the African continent, but this can very easily be turned into a very trustful dialogue on what we want to aim for together, like the common agenda, like solving some of the problems mentioned here. The political economy of conflict is an important one, natural resources, how to also promote national ownership. I think also that the United States proposal on Security Council reform is something to jump on. I see it as a gesture. We understand that we can not only be 5 countries having the veto power to stop whatever. We need to increase this legitimacy. So the question is, can regional organizations, individual countries of different, with different backgrounds, engage in this proposal? It's rather vague, but we should remember that this also opens up for promoting solutions. A concern can, of course, be that in Europe, in Asia, here in Africa and in Latin America, there is all of what is said in the proposal that there can also be more rotating members. And in that debate where the relationship between the UNA was discussed, was that last week or the week before? Also, President of the EU Commission, Faki, underlined the importance of not allowing the ongoing major conflicts translate into additional conflicts on the African continent. And I believe I share his concern, and I really hope that we can find a way forward to promote the good relationship between the AU and the EU, and continue to work together on the various agendas of the Security Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annika, and thank you to both of you for really excellent, thought-provoking presentations in the graveyard hour. I know that we are all a bit tired, but you managed to really provide a lot of food for thought about sort of the more nuanced, concrete ways in which your 2 countries have engaged in the Security Council, and to sort of nuance the debate about you're either with us or you're against us, and that there are various aspects that are also historical and contextual. I'm also of the view that that votes in the Security Council that are not pleasing to everyone should not create an end to the conversation, but should rather be create an opportunity or an impetus for more dialogue, particularly between long-standing historical partners. I will open up now for some questions. I don't know if anyone has any. Yes, I knew there would be so many questions to all of you. I'm going to actually prioritize there are 5 questions I see, so I will actually go like this, but I beg you to please remember that we don't have a lot of time. So I would recognize the ambassador of Norway, the ambassador of Cyprus, Malte Brosig, Professor Isike, and Ina Soiri, in that order.
Sorry, Angela, you have 1 minute.
Oh, and of course, the boss himself. So yes, good, very good.
Yeah.
But we go like this,
Okay.
in the order that I thought. No, I think it's the ambassador of Norway.
Yep. Thank you very much, Angela. And if I go on for too long, please stop me. But again, this is fresh perspective from a country sitting in the Security Council now, so I think it might be useful for people. 2 issues. Penholdership. When we entered the council, everybody told, it's impossible, P3 is just monopolizing everything. That's not our experience, actually. I think that in a way it has been more flexibility on that issue of penholdership. Of course, I mean, in the end, the P5 decides whatever anyhow. But well, we have had a pen on Afghanistan, but then I think what is more important here in this forum is maybe to mention this pretty deep cooperation between Norway and Ireland and African members of the Security Council. Ireland and Niger had a very good resolution on climate and conflict that was vetoed by Russia. But I think, and when we look at co-penholdership from African countries, we should not only look at, okay, who wrote most of this resolution in blue. We should actually look also at the legitimacy that a country like Niger bring to the debate about climate and security. And Norway and Ghana this year, we have made a joint resolution that was adopted on maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea. We could not have done that without close cooperation with Ghana. And same goes for our resolution on safe school that we worked very closely with Niger on in 2021. So I think there is space here, but we also support A3's request for penholdership and to be a penholder. But as Sahar said, it's also an issue of capacity. But again, it's not only about how many lawyers you have back in capital. It's not only about that. So I think African countries are making a mark on that issue. Then just on going back to the topic, AU-UN cooperation, I think UN Secretariat and AU Commission works very closely together. They have these framework agreements from 2017, 2018. Very often it's the member states that makes trouble. And that was one reason why Norway and Rwanda initiated a group of the AU-UN partnership in Addis Ababa to help facilitate issues. I think we, like African countries in the Security Council, we have asked our colleagues to have more briefings from the African Union in the Security Council, and we also want more joint field visits and actually meaningful field visits. On the big difficult issue of financing of AU-led operations, I think there is a movement. There is movement among P3. I mean, Norway, we have also moved closer to the African position. We see that UNSS contributions can be very vital for AU-led operations, and we see that the African Union, the standards on AU-led operations when it comes to human rights, for example, is steadily improving. But of course, things depends on context, but I think there is a movement here. It's a very difficult topic also among African countries, but I think it's important to note that. So the biggest and the best examples maybe of cooperation would be when the UN Security Council take a lead from the African Union Peace and Security Council. So we thought we had a good case of this last week when the leadership of A3 and Kenya, we worked very closely with them on proposing a press statement about the important AU-led peace negotiations in Ethiopia happening here now. So unfortunately, that was also vetoed by P5, and it was not China, it was not US, it was not France, it was not UK. But this resolution was basically repeating what the African Union Peace and Security Council had said. So we were not allowed to support the African Union from New York due to one P5 member. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question, I think, will take less than 30 seconds. My German colleague mentioned the word reform of the United Nations. So, dear Andreas, can you be more precise and explain specifically and explicitly what do you mean by this? Thank you.
Good, yeah. My question also relates to Germany. I mean, when the country was on the Security Council, I was doing many things pretty well, but I want to point on two things that definitely have to change, I think, and one where we need much more critical engagement here. Well, the first thing is that, as you said, Germany served with South Africa again, and this doesn't really happen that often. Usually, you know, you are, as elected member, you find yourself in a different configuration of countries. And both countries actually lobbied with a women, peace and security agenda, but they didn't really cooperate enough, I would argue, while being on the council. And what was the result maybe is that both countries somehow ended up with slightly unsatisfying resolutions. And in the German case, that was watered down significantly by US veto threats. And in the South African case, I'm afraid I think one can still argue about, okay, what's the innovative content here of that resolution? So how does it develop the agenda further, for example? And I think maybe, you know, you need political momentum to push on resolutions, right? And I think there's a little bit of lost momentum in here, and that was preventable because it was, I think, the agendas were clear at the beginning, and it shouldn't be too difficult for the two countries to find out what they support here. That's one point. The other thing is, and that's more, it's even more critical. Germany and France were making a lot of noise about, you know, how great their friendship is, and the jumelage during the twin presidency that created a lot of media attention and so on. But to be honest, while they were having their joint presidency, the issue of Libya was on the table, and situation in Libya deteriorated significantly, and France supported the warlord Haftar, and in Germany the UN-recognized government. And that's pretty devastating. So, and I think I'm disappointed about Germany on not really engaging with France on this particular issue. And in the situation of Mali, it's even worse. It's very clear that the French-led interventions in Sahel is a total failure. And in 2018, there was a resolution actually that said, okay, if the Security Council, if the security situation in Mali deteriorates, we have to do a substantive review of MINUSMA, and that also didn't happen. Well, you know, Germany's contribution to peacekeeping is the biggest in Mali actually. So I was actually, you know, what one can ask, you know, what would we expect if Germany joins again? Will it always follow France uncritically in these kind of situations? And yep, I'll stop here.
I'm Christopher Isike from the University of Pretoria, the African Center for the Study of the US. Sorry, Ambassador Andreas, this goes to you again. You know, most of the things you said were okay by me, but I just got fascinated by something you said about global norms holding, and it ticked a question in me about whose norms. Are the norms you refer to as global, are they truly, you know, truly global? And I'm glad you mentioned the war in Ethiopia and the process in place, all right, to resolve that war, and which is quite different from what is currently in place and how the world was expected to respond to the war in Ukraine. And so, and this is one of the elephant in the room, I'm sorry, Ambassador, from Sweden, that we have not really talked about. And that is the question, the ontological question of how the global north, countries of the global north and citizens of the global north view citizens and countries of the global south? Do you view them as, do they view them as human beings of the same equality, right to equality and entitlement to the benefits of the international system the same way that Europeans, for example, have? If that is the case, you will see that the response, to how the world has responded to the case of Ethiopia, for example, would be different. So I would end by saying, and these things are food for thought to my question, by saying that, like you said, we do have one United Nations, but we'll have one United Nations with different rules for different people.
Yes, good afternoon. I have the questionable honor of being maybe the last commenter here at the graveyard hour. Okay. We've had a very long and rich discussion the whole day. Thank you for everybody. Thank you for all the perspectives we've got. I want to raise one question which might be too late at this hour because it might benefit or would need a bit longer discussion than what we have left. But I mean, we've discussed a lot about different groupings, different country positions, different alignments. We've discussed animals, elephants and lions and foxes. We haven't discussed much about human beings and the diplomats as the way they play a role in making, these decisions and making different agreements, whether it's in a Security Council or at the UN in general. I think, Professor, you mentioned human beings. I would be very interested to know that, for the panel and maybe for the others who were also speaking on behalf of their countries, that, what role does it play, who represents a country and how this person is kind of rooted in the foreign office or the diplomacy? What is the training? What is the preparation behind? Because in the end, as when we are here at the graveyard hour, we know already that it demands a lot of patience and a lot of negotiation skills and a lot of skills to make compromises. And I think that's something what we need now, because it looks like at the moment, apart from, being in a very precarious situation in the world, we are also started to build new enemy images. The whole world, it seems to have gone back to that kind of position that, some people cannot be talked with. And some people are not worth of considering when these discussions are held. So what interests me is really that how do we train our diplomats who take that seat? And what are the skills that are needed, and how those positions, what the different diplomats in those hours when you really have to try to make the compromise and find that resolution that everybody can agree, how that mechanism works. And by the way, I forgot to say, my name is Iina Soiri and I'm from the Embassy of Finland here in Pretoria. Thank you.
Thank you, Iina. Ade?
You served in my country, but you also served in Russia. And I really want to get your personal insight into the mind of the president of that country, and based on your knowledge, how we might be able to move the situation in Ukraine in more positive directions.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't have time for another round. I don't think there are any more questions online. We don't have time for another round, but so I will actually turn back to Ambassador Peschke and Ambassador Söder for their final comments.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, very interesting, these questions. I think I had assumed that by now everybody had actually fallen internally a little bit asleep, but the debate is still very lively, which is good. Huh? Let me just pick up on some of the issues. UN reform. Antonis, I think there are many issues. We need to improve many things about the United Nations, also in the work of your General Assembly and several organizations. But if it comes to the Security Council, I think our thrust in terms of reform, like many others, would be to make the Council more representative. I mean, after all, Africa is not represented by permanent members. Latin America is not represented by permanent members. The soon-to-be most populous state on earth is not represented permanently in the Security Council. The second and third largest contributors to UN funds are also not represented permanently on the Security Council. I mean, I'm not saying this, I mentioned this last point because sometimes these countries find it difficult to explain to their taxpayers why they are not there. So these are issues I think that need to be taken into consideration, but the most thing is to make the Council more representative and more reflective of the realities of the 21st century, because as it is now, it's just seriously outdated. So that's on reform. Then the second point, why do we follow always the lead of France? Normally I hear we are just the small dog of the Americans. So I think it's a nice change yeah, well, France is for us a very important partner. I'm just ready to admit it. We think we have to cooperate, and I think in cooperation, I think we have overcome centuries of enmity of neighboring countries. So this is a big value in itself of the European peace project. And, you know, but what you said about Libya, well, there were nuances between Germany and France exactly at that time, but, you know, that we were not engaging is not true. I was there. We engaged basically day and night, until we found a joint position on the Berlin process, which was supported by France. So, and that was, I think, one of the decisive factors to move it forward in the United Nations and to give a new impetus to the political process in Libya. So I think, yes, we have our nuances. We are also discussing the Mali issue, and I think we are still with the mission, with the UN mission in Mali, and as long as it is possible, are planning to continue to be so. So I think we are taking up these issues, and I think in a spirit of constructive collaboration, not only just following the lead, but I think you know, cooperating, listening to each other is one of the secrets to make the Security Council one day again, successful again, I would say. And then if it comes, third point, to cooperation with South Africa, I think whether it was too little or enough or too much, I think this is in the eye of the observer. I would say we cooperated quite intensively with South Africa during the joint tenure at the Security Council, and I wouldn't say that it is because of too little cooperation between our countries that the resolution you have mentioned wasn't strong enough. I think at the time we had an administration in the US that was even refusing to have to acknowledge climate change in G7 declarations. So I think that shows you the extent to which we had to go to pass resolutions in the United Nations. That was just, I think, the context we had to work. And I think the last point, Annika, I would say, thank you for putting so much trust in my ability, but I cannot live up to this obligation. I served in Russia, that is right. I also had the privilege to serve in Nigeria, and I liked it very much. But, you know, to know what is happening in the mind of the Russian president, I simply cannot do it. But I think there's one easy way to get out of this situation. Stop this war. And I think the war cannot be stopped by just anybody. I think it has to be stopped by the country which attacked. And for this country, it's very easy. Stop attacking. And I think I would say the Russian president knows this simple truth. The question is why he chooses to ignore it.
Thank you. Thank you for very good questions. On UN reform broader than UN Security Council reform, there is a lack of trust in the UN from many bigger actors and donors. It's very often accused of not being efficient in development programs and so on. I cannot say that this is true. I've been a UN official myself for 5 years. This is very different from the way big donors view the World Bank. And there is an imbalance here that I don't really know how to address. Maybe it's a governance issue. And now in this common agenda group, they are discussing also governance of the World Bank. So we will see. Very often, some member states actually block reform in individual agencies, funds and programs, or more general reform. So it's also, again, up to the 193. On women, peace and security and blocking good progress in the Security Council, I can tell that I mediated in the Georgia-Russian conflict in 2021. And there, the word women, peace and security was not accepted at all because gender and women, peace and security are no longer accepted as thematic words by Russia. But we went around it, and so we called that item the fact that the conflict affects women and men differently. So it's still on the agenda. I left this process, but it's still on the agenda. So we have to continue to fight for gender equality and women, peace and security norms in many directions. When it comes to France and Germany, I think all of us that are members of the European Union are so satisfied with the fact that there are no more wars between France and Germany. If we look back in history, this also means that we see their cooperation as an axis, and that is relevant. But then, of course, we all of the 27 want to be listened to. And on, for example, Libya, there are different views in the European Union. We are 27, and there are different views. We heard about Western Sahara this morning. There are also very different views on Western Sahara in the European Union. There are also very different views on Western Sahara in the African Union. Yes. So I believe we have to live with the fact that there are, when we are many members, we also have different views on situations close to our borders, far away, or even within our own, group. On Ethiopia, are all citizens equal? I think this is the principle that we embark from. I am not following the work on the Security Council on a daily basis anymore. and maybe Shamala can help here, but it's my understanding that many actors wanted to find ways to stop this civil conflict, but that also it was in a way referred to the AU because AU is the principal actor in this context. But I would certainly say that human lives matter, all of them the same. Another example from our tenure is Myanmar, where we were actually not allowed to bring Myanmar to the attention of the Security Council by a nearby permanent member of the Security Council. And as we all know, the slaughter is, really went on there, there as well. So it would be good to know if you could tell what could the non-permanent members, the EU, or anyone have done differently in this very, very devastating conflict in Ethiopia. Finally, on Irina's question on human beings, of course they matter. And sometimes the missions in the UN in New York do not get any instructions from their capitals, and then of course they matter a lot. Very often they do get instructions, and then of course personality matters. If you are respectful, if you have well thought through agenda, if you build trust, it matters. This takes me also to the other question, can we talk to everyone? And in my view, this is what diplomats are for. Or to talk to the enemy, and it's more important to talk to the enemy than to talk to the guy you are already like-minded with and where you're already cooperate. And I find this very important. And sometimes we should think of this when we use sanctions, because sanctions has become a tool to punish rather than to change behavior. And we have smart sanctions, and we're trying to avoid effects on people in the countries that are under sanctions, but it's, I'm not sure it's working fully. I work a lot on the Ukraine matters in my capacity as chair of the European Institute of Peace. So I come also in touch with how Russian representatives view the conflict. And as Andreas, I do not have any other solution than to stop the war. To mediate a solution where Ukraine is forced to give up its territory is not in the cards. A lot can be done to alleviate suffering and also to try to influence Russia to abide with international humanitarian law, even if other principles are not followed. But it's very sad and difficult conflict. I remember, and this will be my final comment, the Kenyan ambassador to the UN made a speech, I think, in the first vote on the invasion in Ukraine. And it was a very strong speech where he explained that in Africa we live with the colonial borders that were given to us. We didn't have much of a say. But it's not in our interest to start violent conflict in order to try to change those borders. And I think that was a very wise comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you for really provocative, sincere reflections and addressing the questions from the Q&A. I don't have very much time except to say thank you. I would like to emphasize that one of the things that has come out most strongly for me today has been the fact that there's I always knew it, but there really is a lot of variation within Europe, within Africa, and that there is a tendency for us to really forget the different perspectives that European countries might have, depending on their proximity to a conflict, depending on historical fact, depending on geographic proximity to a conflict. I've already said that. But that the same thing applies in Africa. And also this idea that elected member states actually could benefit from greater, there's never going to be too much, I think, cooperation between the E10. You can never have too much, whether it will be on, for example, helping to establish some institutional consistency. So maybe the African Union could help build that constituent continuity and institutionalize the lessons and the capacity in New York. The fact that Sweden and other countries have learned and used the EU partly as a lesson from the way the AU has worked with the A3. I mean, there are many, many, many lessons, and I cannot summarize them. I won't try. But I want to just say thank you so much, and I want us to give everyone a hand, and then I have an announcement. First, the hand to our panelists, and then the announcement, and then I will hand over to the closing session. My announcement is that all of you in this room have in your folders an evaluation form. It's very, very important that you fill out this evaluation form during the next session, and that you give it to some organizer who will probably be standing at the door waiting to receive it. It's very helpful for us to be able to plan other events and to learn from this one. So thank you very much, and stay tuned for the closing session. Thank you.